Hello, and welcome back to the Raw Code Academy. This is Raw Code Live, and I am your host, David Flanagan. Today, I am joined by Lucas from Loft, who is going to introduce us to their new open source project, DevPod. Hello, Lucas. How are you?
Hey, David. I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's been a while. We haven't done a session like this for a long, long time, so it's nice to have you back in the hot seat and ready to show us something new and cool today. For anyone who hasn't seen our previous episode or isn't familiar with you and your work, could you please take a few moments to introduce yourself and tell us what you've been up to?
Yeah, sure. I'm Lucas. I'm one of the founders of Loft Labs. What we do with our product Loft is essentially provide building blocks for platform engineers who have to build platforms on top of Kubernetes to provision clusters for the engineering teams, etc. In one of these building blocks. And I think that's the last time we've spoken. David is vCluster. That's a pretty popular open source project we launched. We also maintain the DevSpace project, which we handed over as a sandbox project to the CNCF. And now we're on our third project, and that's what we're talking about today.
Nice, awesome. So the project was announced last week, I believe. It's called DevPod, and I know that it's a tool that sits on top of dev containers and tries to give people virtual machines or infrastructure with all the tooling that they need to work on a project. Am I on the right lines there?
Yeah, that wraps it up pretty well. We announced it last Tuesday. And DevPod, the idea is essentially, you want something like code spaces, but you don't want it as a hosted, managed service that kind of locks you into a specific infra. You essentially want that flexibility of, spinning things up in your own AWS account or on Kubernetes or even a local Docker desktop, and give it the freedom to switch back and forth whenever you want to do so, right? You can save some costs by staying locally, and then you go to AWS whenever you need that power. And it really gives you the flexibility to, dynamically switch between these environments. I think that's the true power of this new project.
Nice. I'm curious, obviously there's been a substantial, I would assume, amount of effort and teamwork that's went into this from the Loft side to try and make this a product that you can open source and put in the hands of thousands to tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of developers. What were the driving factors that, you're all sat in Loft HQ one day drinking your coffee and you went, what, we should build this? What was the original driving factor then?
Yeah, I guess Loft HQ is more like Slack channels and Zoom sessions because we're fully distributed. But yeah, you're right. I think we were thinking about how can we, obviously we were looking at these solutions, Gitpod, code spaces, etc., and everything that happened in that space, also for our own team, right? And we're like over 20 people now. There's folks from the design side reviewing things that get changed in the UI. Then product wants to have a look before things are released, and then we have the open source community contributing to our projects. And we were thinking, how can we make it easier for people to just launch an environment, spin up a certain branch, contribute a little bit. And we were looking at code spaces because we're using repositories on GitHub or open source projects on GitHub, obviously. But then locking people into that very specific environment. I mean, the experience of launching it is great if you are on GitHub, right? But what if you're not on GitHub, or what if you are, if you don't want to pay for that premium that essentially they charge for these environments, and you just want to have that experience locally, or you just want to have that experience in your own Kubernetes clusters and EKS, right? We were asking us these questions and we didn't really find a great answer for that anywhere. So we just started building things internally. I think, our CTO, Fabian, and my co-founder, he's he just sometimes just pulls things together over a weekend. And that was the same thing with DevPod. And that was like an initial prototype. And that's already 5 or 6 months, ago at this point. And, it seemed very promising and exciting. And we're like, okay, maybe we should invest some time here and actually build a legit open source project out of this. And that's what we did. And now we're presenting it to the world. We had a little bit of a private beta kind of session a few weeks ago with some of our customers because they've expressed interest in this topic, and we're like, oh, even better, people that are already using our tooling would see an additional value here. So let's invest some time and build this thing and get it off the ground.
Nice. I love how I started the conversation with, you must have invested a serious amount of effort and people time and everything, and you're like, yeah, one person built it over a weekend. At least, the proof of concept. But, it's all the best ideas.
Well, that was the version, yeah, that was the alpha version 0, I think. When, yeah, I think now obviously there's more parts of our engineering team involved. So let's definitely give credit to all of the folks that have contributed internally. And yeah, the most exciting thing is actually we've already seen the first. DevPod has this provider concept, and Engin from Pulumi has over the weekend apparently created a scaleway provider for DevPod. So we even see the first bigger community contributions. It was super surprising. We made the repository public, I think 3 or 4 hours before announcing it to the public, just to make sure we test everything, upgrade procedures, and how all of that works with the public repository. And then we got the first pull request even before the press release. And we're like, dang it, people are onto this.
Nice. All right. Well, obviously with Rockwood Live, I'm going to try and use DevPod. We're going to work through what that process looks like and show people how to get started. But I have one more question before we do that, if you're happy to answer it. And I'm curious, right? Looking at the Loft portfolio of open source projects, you've got vCluster that I can run in my Kubernetes clusters to facilitate virtual clusters for multiple use cases, which I think ties in quite nicely maybe with what we're going to see with DevPod. And then we also have DevSpace, which also kind of is, I don't know if it's tangential or not, but it's very close to what DevPod's doing, and where it provides development environments for software deploying to Kubernetes, maybe more. I'm not that familiar. So I'm curious about, how do these work together? Is there a grand plan there to kind of take over that developer experience? Do I need to use all three? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Actually, a lot of our community members who are already familiar with DevSpace, when we presented DevPod to them, they had that exact same question. Isn't there a lot of overlap here, right? But DevPod is kind of under DevSpace. So DevSpace is the tool that deploys your containers to Kubernetes and creates this hot reloading workflow for these containers, right? What DevPod does is it launches the environment to then start your IDE in. So it is a layer lower. When you're thinking about what do I need to develop an application, you do need an IDE, you do need a linter, you do need a debugger, you do need all these things locally. And we're trying to get rid of that by essentially moving that into a DevPod. So it's very, very likely that if you're working with Kubernetes and you love to work with DevSpace or another tool like Scaffold or any of these other tools out there, you would launch a DevPod and then you launch DevSpace from within that DevPod. That's how it would typically work together. But DevPod is a little broader than DevSpace, because even if you don't, if Kubernetes is not your target environment, you can launch a DevPod and work directly in there on top of, Docker and without Kubernetes, right? Which is something that DevSpace doesn't do at all.
Nice. All right, that makes sense to me. Especially even tying in vCluster, where you can give your developers the ability to provision virtual clusters and a big huge dev Kubernetes cluster, where they can then have their dev pods where they run their dev space. I think I understand that flow. I think it makes sense. And I think it's very interesting to me personally. One, I'm a developer advocate and I travel to a lot of events, and I travel with a MacBook Air. It's not slow, but for a dev environment, it's also not great. And also for the last, 3 years, I've had an M1 or M2 MacBook. And I've got to say, I run into nothing but problems, especially compiling Go and Rust. And, I'm pulling container images, which are only built for AMD 64. And I'm pulling my head out going, there has to be a better way. I can already see the draw to have a tool like DevPod where I can get an environment. Now, you said you can run it locally, and that's great. But I think for me, I'm going to be like, okay, I want to spin up a Scaleway or an AWS instance, use that as my dev box, and have it managed for me with the tools that I need. And I'm hoping that's what we're going to see today. So.
Yeah, that's the repeatability we're aiming for with DevPod.
Awesome. All right, shall we start having some fun?
Yeah, I'm excited. I know you always take these tools apart, so I'm really excited to see what you're doing with DevPod this time.
All right. Well, hopefully everyone can see my screen now. The website is available if people want to check that out at devpod.sh. So go there for all the documentation, links to download DevPod, and link to the GitHub repository too. It's a nice website. You know, as superficial things go, they're also important. It's nice when you have a developer tool that it has a shiny website for people to kind of understand what the use case is. I'm not going to spend any time on this. I just kind of want to go straight to the documentation and see what we can do. Now, I did cheat a little bit, mostly because I was curious last week and I wanted to see what DevPod was, and I'm always curious to see when things provide a GUI. So I have installed DevPod, but I haven't done anything with it. So here we go. And this is our DevPod UI.
Cool.
I haven't set up any providers except for, I think I clicked the Docker one, but that's where we are. But I'm assuming step one is DevPod doesn't do anything without one of those providers. So we need to configure one or more so that we have the ability to create the developer environments. Correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Nice. All right, let's see. Yeah, I did add the Docker one. So I don't want to use this, but I'm assuming it just runs containers and my Docker daemon, which is Docker desktop, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, it just connects to your local Docker daemon to kind of spin up a DevPod as a container. And then I think it gives you access to the local Docker as well, so you can run Docker builds, etc., even inside that DevPod. That's the idea behind it. If you use one of the other providers, there's providers that provision VMs. We call them machine providers. That would be like a AWS or Google Cloud and things like that, where you actually spin up a VM, and then it would deploy Docker inside that VM, and then stand up the DevPod agent inside that VM, and then launch a DevPod container in there. So whether you're using the local Docker provider or one of the machine remote providers, we're always launching Docker inside of it, and then always launching the DevPod as a container, essentially.
Okay. That makes sense, I guess. So I guess we should show the local Docker one, which means I'll need to start Docker. Is there anything else in the UI that we need to kind of play with right now, or are we just going to wait for Docker to start up and create our first workspace?
Yeah, I think that should work. You can hit create workspace here. I think even while it's loading, we can explore what happens over here. Yeah, the first thing is you have to enter the source, right? You either select a folder locally or you type in a Git repository wherever you have a devcontainer.json or something ready. And then on the right-hand side, you see like links for Python or Node.js kind of quick starts. Microsoft has these quick starts for GitHub code spaces, and we are essentially using these examples without any modification to show people, hey, this is just like code spaces. I actually use the same definition. That's why it works out of the box, but works with any repository essentially, especially if you have the devcontainer.json configured in there.
Okay, so I mean, what I did type there was my Contria project, but I don't believe we have a devcontainer.json. No, we don't. Is that a problem?
I actually think it may guess what
There is a cargo.json.
what the right image would be.
If that helps.
I mean, we can always try it and check it out if it works or not.
Let's see. I always like to just see what happens. So, hey, look, it detected it. I know this is really small. I don't think I can zoom in on a Mac app. At least I don't know how to do that. But it does say detected project language Rust, and it is pulling down dev containers Rust latest. So I guess it works.
I can't promise you that the application will actually launch in there because it just takes like a default like Rust image, right? If you have a dev container JSON, you can obviously specify all of these things, but we're trying our best to kind of guess what you need. That's the approach here.
Yeah, I think this might work. It also says it's downloading VS Code. So this is now opened my local VS Code, and it's setting up SSH remote container session.
Yeah, correct.
Sweet.
Yeah, it essentially created that DevPod inside the container, and then it connected you to that via SSH. You see that on the left bottom corner that it says the SSH connection there.
Yep. Nice. So well, I don't have my macros, but that's okay. That's probably my fault. And I don't know how to type. There we go. So this is, yeah, a Linux machine, and because it's a local desktop, we're getting AMD 64. And in theory, I should just be able to run a cargo build, right?
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Well, I can actually already see that I have Rust Analyzer in my VS Code, and it's actually kind of doing all the fetch and stuff at the moment. So we'll give that a second. So maybe we can dive into actually what kind of happened here. So we added a new workspace to DevPod. We now have this thing where I can just open it. That's there forever now, right? Even if I close this, assuming I can just restart this whenever I want.
Yeah, open is just going to reconnect the IDE, right, to this environment. And if you hit the three little dots, you also see it says like start with, which essentially lets you open it with other IDEs. In case like the default one you selected for your Docker provider was Docker desktop, VS Code on the desktop, but you could also say VS Code in the browser, and then it would just connect you to that one.
Yeah, I'm going to try it. It's got a light color theme by default. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but that's VS Code's problem, not yours. Yeah, here we go. This is neat. See, I went through a little phase of trying just like to work from a Chromebook for so long and could never get it to work. And it feels like this may have been the missing thing that I needed, like VS Code browser support in a remote container with the tools that I need. That would have been pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, you won't believe it, but one of the first issues that were opened were like, can you support iPads as well? And we're like, dang it, now we got to create an iPad app for this.
People do love, like, the amount of times I see people with their iPads at conferences and they've got the little keyboard on it, which I have tried so hard to be able to type on. It is impossible. But they do seem to use like a web-based VS Code and try to do stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah,
All
maybe.
right. Not
Yeah.
for me.
Don't they
but
have the... I'm not sure if they have like a keyboard you can attach with the iPads as well, like like the Surface ones have from Microsoft.
I don't. Well, it's just MagSafe attachment, but it does give you a USB-C slot, so you can go nuts, I suppose.
Oh, okay.
All right. So that's kind of cool. We're now building our application. It looks like it's going to build because it's 75% through, and we didn't get an error from VS Code to say that the Rust Analyzer build failed. So I'm assuming in a few moments we'll have went from 0 tooling to an IDE with Rust support and an application that compiles. So I think that's pretty cool. But the UI is not the only way to do this, right? When I was in the settings, I did see add CLI to path, and I've got a green tick, which means I have the CLI. So I'm assuming if I want to, I don't really need to work with the UI at all.
Yeah, actually what the UI does under the hood, whenever you click any kind of button to create something, it actually just runs the CLI command under the hood. The adding to your path is really just more of a convenience thing, so you can also access the CLI directly. But yeah, everything ties back to a CLI command under the hood.
Okay. Fill up my CLI. Oh, so I can just do dev. There we go. Cool. So shall we try a different provider?
Yeah, you can see the help page.
Sorry, I know I should probably be like going through your getting started guide and trying to be a bit more pragmatic here, but I'm also just wanting to play with it. So we've kind of seen the browser and we've seen VS Code. I don't use any of these other things. So I'm not that fussed. So let's see if we can manage some providers.
Oh, I'm just seeing we do have a Vim quick start, because that was another question that came up in a previous live stream, and I'm like, I don't know how to connect this to Vim. I'm like, oh, I guess we have a quick start for that as well.
Huh. Vim.
Which I guess makes sense. Like if you scroll down, it probably just says like connect via SSH, and then
Yes.
Yeah,
But
that makes
you set
sense.
up
That's
some
yeah, that's
aliases, right? Is that
yeah, that's a
modified in my?
cheat integration to to connect to Vim.
I'm curious if that's modified my SSH config or my. Yeah, I guess it has done probably. I guess we'll find out when I spin up a remote provider because it probably won't do anything if I don't have one. So let's see if we can get that working. In fact, did it build? Ah, close. What did it miss? I'm sure I've got some. Oh, I probably have like an OpenSSL dependency or something that's needed. So let's close that for now. So devpod list, devpod stop, I suppose. Cool. All right, devpod provider add, and then
Yeah, you'd essentially, so typically you need the provider specified in, some kind of repository. I think they're default providers. You can see that here, like at Docker and at AWS, right? That's like the default providers. But you could also point it at a repository or at a YAML file, like the scaleway provider that Engin wrote. And then it would essentially pull the specification from there.
okay. So
If you in this provider, if you go to the like the at G Cloud, like we just map like G Cloud to the actual repository, right? But if you look at the releases here on the right hand side, you see that there's one release of this provider, and in that provider, in the assets, if you scroll down, I think, yeah, if you click show all assets, it should, yeah, provider YAML. That's essentially the file that specifies how this provider is being run within DevPod.
okay. So
Yeah, it's got
bunch
like
of
the name, the
options.
version, right? And then a whole bunch of commands, available options, like which region, etc. Like everything that you've seen in the UI, when there's a drop down to show you, which region you can select, right? It essentially comes from this provider YAML file.
Okay, well, I am going to very quickly off screen on another window make sure my Google Cloud is authenticated against the correct account, not one of my customers' accounts, and then I'll add the provider. That I seen. Why am I doing this? Because I seen when we were here that it said be aware authentication is obtained using the G-Cloud CLI. So I just want to make sure that
Yes.
I'm on the right account before I do anything terrible. And my customers
Yeah,
get
there's
upset.
two options to authenticate it. I think the safest and the default option is to just use G-Cloud CLI because, whatever your authentication mechanism is with Google Cloud, it has it in your, in your keychain or in your Microsoft's store that they have for Windows.
Yep.
So all of that is safe, but you can also provide it with, service account token and things like that. If you would want to specifically do that, but we typically recommend just authenticate with the AWS CLI, G-Cloud CLI, and then the DevPod CLI will essentially call that other CLI.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So let's do devpod provider add. Let's pull in a provider, and I have a project called Rockwood Academy. And I'm done. So if I do a list, yeah, okay, so Docker sets as a default, and from the docs we see
It actually
the
made
provider.
Google Cloud your default. Yeah, so in the
Oh,
CLI,
okay.
I think it does the latest one as default. If you do it in the UI, there's a little checkbox that is like default checked, and you can uncheck it. That would set the false flag for this one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. If you click on add provider, you'll see that as well. It's kind of funny in the UI when you click add provider, just click on one of them. It's now loading the provider YAML. That's why it takes like a second, right? If you switch to another one, it will load again for just a second because it always pulls it live from GitHub.
So you have the ability to really tweak and modify this without having to push updates to desktop applications all the time. So that's pretty neat.
Exactly. That is the whole idea. And if you click on this plus symbol there, that's the way to add your custom providers. So you can write a provider, put it in a Git repository, and it will essentially pull it from there.
All right, well, let's find Engen.
Yeah, let's try his provider. I don't know. Do you have a Scaleway account?
I do have a Scaleway account.
Try it live.
So,
Oh, nice.
DevPod provider Scaleway. So how much code is that? I mean, 7 commits. I'm
So
assuming.
he actually went the fancy route. So the simple route is to just have a provider YAML file that then just like literally has like bash commands in it, right? To call like gcloud, create a VM, etc., right, via the CLI. But he went the fancy route by actually making it a Golang based provider. So I was like super impressed when I opened this up, and I'm like, oh wow, this is legit.
All right. So while I add this provider, we do have a question from Russell in the chat. So let me pop that up. Russell is asking that he's seen a reference to Open VS Code. And he's curious if that is the real code, but the open source one without the Microsoft metrics. And if so, do you have custom config? As the last time he tried to use code OSS, and needed a flag to enable it to connect to dev containers. Does that make sense?
So
I don't
think
understand it.
with the regular. Yeah, I think the regular VS Code you run on your desktop. I haven't tried it with Code OSS, just with the regular VS Code. But I think what you're aiming at is like the browser based version, because I think we got an issue about this as well a couple of days ago, where folks have requested for us to use like the non-open source version in the browser, because there are apparently, I didn't know that either before the issue was open, that there are differences between the pure open source VS Code, and apparently there's some other version of it. And we run the pure open source one in the browser apparently. But locally, it's whatever you have in your, whatever your VS Code says when you have it in the path, right?
Yeah, I think there is some weird things with the open source one. I don't think you get access to a lot of the extensions because it uses a different extension marketplace rather than the official VS Code one. But I don't know if that's changed. It's been a while since I looked into that. Okay, let's add this provider. So click go. Oh, he's broke it. His provider.yaml seems to be incorrect. Is that expected?
Interesting. Maybe we have to point it. Oh yeah, can you just do the release asset? Yeah, maybe we need that.
So copy a link to the provider.yaml.
I think so.
Oh yeah, so it can either be a URL or a local path to provider file. Or, okay, so maybe actually what I should have done is just do this. Yeah, there we go.
Ah, perfect. That works.
All right, so we could add some Scaleway credentials here, but I have already configured my Google account, so let's go with that. Make my life a little bit easier for today. So now we need a project. Let's pick one of those ones that were the example ones with the devcontainer.json. So do you have a language of choice?
Ooh, it seems like you're a Rust fan. I'm not an expert though.
Yeah, let's do it. All right.
The UI is like the desktop project is written in Rust as well, as far as I know.
It is. I was very nosy and I went to look at the code and I seen it's using Tauri, which is like this really cool framework for building desktop applications with like a Rust toolchain underneath it. So yeah, I was very excited to see that. I think it's awesome. Okay.
Yeah, I was a little skeptical in the beginning when the engineering team suggested that, because there's other like more, I guess, mature frameworks at this point. But I'm super happy with the result, and like the team said, it was like a lot of fun to build this, and they have a lot of cool features like regarding like auto updates and things like that baked in. It seems to be a very, very smooth experience.
Yeah, definitely. It seems to be gaining quite a lot of momentum too. I think a lot of people are struggling with Electron these days because like the overhead of running
Mhm.
Electron apps is just getting worse and worse. I'm not sure how VS Code managed
Yeah.
to keep their editor snappy, but I struggle with Electron apps these days. So Tauri seems to be a pretty good approach. Plus, because it's written in Rust, you can actually use WebAssembly plugin models as well, which just makes it even cooler. So yeah, very cool project. All right,
Yeah,
let's
I know
call
the team
this.
was really proud of like getting the size down. I think it's like under 30 megabytes now to download DevPod, and it's quite slim.
Wow, some of the command line applications I build are bigger than that. So that's great. So this right now is creating a VM on Google Cloud, right? So I'm assuming this may
Correct, yeah.
take just a few seconds. And I'm assuming, please correct me if I'm wrong, that you're just stuffing a whole bunch of user data into like the cloud config of some kinds to kind of bootstrap it, get it to a point where it can function.
Yeah, so we have this DevPod agent that gets injected into the VM, and then we launch Docker inside or install Docker within the VM, and then we launch the container that you're then connecting to inside that VM as well. And we essentially connect through that devpod agent to that container. That's like essentially giving us this like SSH connection to the machine and then to the container that runs on that machine.
And how's the authentication handled between that agent and my local machine?
I think there's just like a SSH key pair that gets generated locally, and we inject that into the VM, right, with the agent.
Okay.
And then regular, I think the first like connecting with the machine is just like regular G-Cloud commands, or like we're using, I think the for G-Cloud and AWS, etc. We're not like having to call the CLI directly. I think we kind of use their client libraries under the hood, or a mix of both, whatever is available. Like Kubernetes, obviously, Go client, etc. just connects to it.
Cool. Well, let's dig a little deeper on this, right? So it's just my local VS Code, which I love, right? And browser ones are fine, but I spend a lot of time crafting my config and my extensions for VS Code. That's a really strong. I'm happy with this. I can open this terminal here, and I can do cargo run, and we should see hello world, right? But I got to be honest, I do hate this terminal in VS Code. Can I do like a devpod SSH? Is that a thing?
What do you mean devpod SSH?
Oh, like, can I use my own terminal?
Oh, you mean like outside in your terminal? Yeah. That would be the Vim extension, right? To do it that way.
Oh, it's just because the Vim extension said, in fact, let's split this, right? Because the Vim extension told me to do SSH workspace demo dot devpod, which also works, which is also very cool, right? I'm assuming I didn't really want to show my SSH config, but it should be okay, I think. I'm assuming something's just, yeah, you're just injecting stuff
Yeah,
into
it's
this.
just being added. Correct.
Okay, cool. And there's the SSH keys, so we can actually see how that authentication is handled, and there's a devpod directory with the keys available. So that's pretty neat. But this to me is the ideal workflow, right? I've got what is now a Linux machine, AMD 64. We've got 3 cores and 16 gig of RAM. Not bad. I'm hoping we can tweak that. And I've got my own VS Code with my own extensions. I can now bin the terrible terminal and just work the way that I want. So that means I can say hello from Linux. And now my days of problems. Oh, it didn't put me into the right worker. Where would my app be? Let's see. Workspaces Rust demo. Now we could do cargo run. And now my days of having problems with my M2 Mac and pulling containers and stuff. And you told me this gives me a Docker daemon. Oh, it doesn't. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you actually have access from in here.
Because I'm in a container, right? Rather than being
Yes.
on the host.
But you
Okay.
can, I think with gcloud, you could go into the VM directly and you would essentially see it there.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a call for maybe having a flag like devpod SSH where I do Rust demo, but I say dash host or something. Just
Yeah,
making sure
there's
that's
actually a command because we had to debug something. Let me try to open the help page. Actually go into the machine. We have a helper command for this as well.
Oh, there was a devpod machine command, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you can run devpod machine SSH and that will drop you into the machine. Yeah, that's what I was looking for.
Well, the machine name is different, so let's do a list. Oh no, I don't have machines.
Yeah, the machine name, that's something really interesting. So it created one VM right now, and you saw that took like about a minute or so to create that VM. And obviously that's something we can't change, right? It's always going to take some time to start a VM. So what we're actually doing is by default, we're reusing the machine for different dev pods, right? So you can have multiple workspaces. And as long as you both, if you're using the Google Cloud provider again for another workspace, it will create a second container on that very same machine. So the machine is shared by default.
Okay. So yeah, there were two things interesting here. One, I was already in the machine and I ran devpod machine. So devpod was available inside the machine, which is cool. But when I came off of it, I then was able to devpod machine SSH onto the Rust demo one. And now I can run Docker commands to see that. So I guess this is going to be really good for most workflows, unless one of my workflows is I want to build Docker container images. And I guess maybe there's a different dev container setup for doing something like that. But I guess that's not terribly important for right now. But I do like that I have access to the machine. This is a... this is a 3-core, 6 hyper-threaded machine with 16 gig of RAM. Do I get to configure that?
Yeah, so in the if you open the UI real quick, you'll see that you can configure the provider. And it's just essentially defined in the if you hit that edit button there. And there you can define the machine. Right now, we have this only for the provider, but what we actually want to allow you to do is change it for the workspaces as well. And you see on the bottom, actually the reuse machine right now is not checked. So you would always create a new machine. If you have the reuse machine, the second workspace would be using the same machine again.
Got it. Yeah, so I guess if I say reused and configure this to be like a N2 standard 16, which is probably, I'm not sure off the top of my head, but probably a decent sized machine, I could reuse that for multiple projects and always get the correct dev container.
Correct. Yeah. You can also expand these like agent options there if you go back to that screen. And that's where you can see things like inject the Docker credentials and check Git credentials, etc. And there's probably more options to come. That's essentially what that agent that lives on the VM is going to inject into the respective containers.
So it's going to consume my local Docker and Git credentials and put them, right, okay, got it. How does it know if it's inactive? Like if I quit the GUI, does it still do the inactivity kill or?
Yeah. So that's really interesting. The inactivity is actually managed by the agent that is running on the VM. So what you're doing when you're SSHing is you're connecting to that agent, right? So that agent sees all the SSH connections to the machine or to the workspaces on the machine, and it essentially sees when there are no connections. And that's what this timeout is. So if you would, throw your laptop out of the window now, right? There's nothing running and no connection. Nothing needs to be client side, right? Then 5 minutes later, the agent would still, it turns itself off, right? It turns the machine off that it's running on, basically. That's what it does.
Nice. So it's like a pulse or some sort of health check. And if we're not checking in to see that we're doing something on that machine, it's just going to stop itself, which I guess is good if you do start using some of the chunkier hardware. Like the prices get wildly expensive. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a core benefit of DevPod, right? We actively want to encourage people to have machines in different environments, right? You can have, as I said, one in like your local Minikube or your local Docker, and you can run simple things there. And then if you need to do like your integration tests or an end-to-end test or something more complex, work on like real data, then you're just connecting to your AWS provider. But then you switch back to Docker again, 3 hours later, and we don't want you to have to manually like remember, oh, I forgot to pause this, it ran overnight, that kind of thing. That's why we added that automation there.
Nice. We have another question from Russell in the chat, so I'm going to pop that up. But Russell is asking if it's possible to share or reuse those machines across multiple people within a team, or if it's local to the single user.
I guess you could, but I would not recommend it, to be honest, because what we're doing, like you saw, you can SSH into the machine, right? And if we're injecting your Git credentials and things like that into the machine, right, it's probably not ideal to share those kind of secrets.
Yeah, good call. So
I think there's nothing that would stop you, right, except for your security team, I guess.
Yeah, well, most organizations aren't unfortunate enough to have a security team, so it's all right. I don't know if that's fortunate or unfortunate. I guess it goes either way, depending on where your concerns lie. This is a pretty cool project. I can see myself using this. I mean, obviously, I'm going to have to go write an Equinix metal provider now, so that I can get some chunky metal and start using this for all of my machines. But I really understand and appreciate the value proposition. I like the pluggable provider model. It's very configurable. And if I can write an Equinix metal provider with just some YAML, then good. I don't know if I'm going to go down the complicated smart route like Engen did, but it's nice that is an option, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we were actually, after we saw that scaleware provider, we were like, hey, we should have some kind of live session where someone codes a provider in an hour or something like that, when we just stream it. Because it's relatively easy, and there have been requests for OVH and Hetzner and all of these like smaller cloud providers. And I think that's the beauty of DevPod, right? You're not restricted to these big environments. You're not restricted to us creating this for you. You can just create it whenever you need it.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're in I don't know if it's a fortunate time, but there are a lot of these smaller cloud providers whose pricing is getting very competitive, and which opens up even to smaller teams the ability to have these remote dev environments and kind of give their developer teams a bit more velocity and the tooling that they need and the hardware that they need without having to ship them a new laptop every 12 months or whatever. So it's definitely interesting times. I'm looking at
absolutely. I think even us, I mean, we just looked at the prices for like using it internally, right? And we're like, why wouldn't we use one of the cheaper cloud providers, right? Like our dev environments don't need to be in AWS because they cost like 3 times as much as one of the local providers, and it just works the same way.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, that's awesome. I love this project. Thank you for coming on and kind of walking us through it. Before we finish, is there anything that we haven't covered that you think would be good to show to the audience?
I think there's a whole bunch more settings, but I think people will probably explore them. I think by clicking through the UI, things usually get a lot easier to kind of find out what's going on. I think one thing I haven't tried out myself is working with the IntelliJ suite. So I gotta try that. All the JetBrains IDEs. I'm not sure if it seems like you're a VS Code guy as well.
Yeah, I have a rule about not running Java on any of my machines, so that rules out the entire IntelliJ suite of projects.
Got it.
I'm not frustrated with VS Code, but I always keep my eyes on upcoming editors. So you'll see that when I'm on the CLI, I do use Helix, which I think is really interesting alternative to Vim. And I've been keeping a close eye on Zed as well, but I don't think they have any support for this sort of dev container workflow. So yeah, it'd probably be VS Code for me for the foreseeable future, but always hoping to find a new cool project. And I actually think Zed uses Tauri as well, the Rust desktop framework underneath the hood. So
cool. Yeah, I think given that, I think devcontainer.json as a open source kind of standard that Microsoft wants to push, I think pretty much anyone building an IDE or, even doing some in-browser things, right? They essentially will look at that standard and try to kind of comply with it, or have this like SSH capability that is required to then connect to these dev container environments. I think that's something we're banking on, right? That this will be the standard. I'm quite hopeful that we don't have like I think right now there's like 5 or 6 like different competing standards, and we looked at the space, and we can implement other standards as well, if as long as they're open source, of course. But Dev Container was already there, and it's in it's GitHub pushing it and make it so easy for you to add it to a repository. So that we were like, okay, this is the first one that we want to build on. But I can also see us build on other different standards there as well, and kind of be like the glue between the IDE, the cloud provider, and that essentially workspace definition that lives in your Git repository. That's really the 3 things we're trying to get together here.
Yeah, I think a really interesting approach. Not that I want to fill up your feature backlog by any means, but if you can detect in the absence of like a VS Code devcontainer.json, if there was like a shell.nix, Nix is still it's not popular, but it's a very good tool for building development environments. And if you could just bootstrap a machine with the Nix system and then create a Nix shell with that, that would be a very interesting idea for me. And I think Nix is getting a bit more popularity, especially in the container space, as people are looking for tools to build container images that aren't necessarily Docker in a Docker file. And Nix seems to be a bit of a rising contender there too. But that's a segue.
Yeah, I've definitely saw some requests in that direction on the on Twitter as well. Once we launched DevPod. There's one more thing I wanted to mention. If you want to make it like, if you're like an open source maintainer like we are, and you want to make it super easy for people to open a project with DevPod, we also have this like open in DevPod button, where we register like the DevPod protocol, right? So you have this like DevPod link that kind of like Zoom opens up the application and has everything pre-filled. The only thing you need to have is DevPod installed and at least one provider to kind of spin that environment up. And then we hope that will be happening in more and more repositories, that these links get added, as long as there's like a devcontainer.json file in there, or even if not, as we've seen, right, it may work, but it may require some tweaking afterwards to get the project to actually build.
Nice.
That's something really, really cool we added right from the start too.
Yeah, that's a nice touch. It just kind of makes it a lot easier for people, especially if you go to that README of a project and you're considering, well, maybe I'll clone this and see if I can build it and do some hacking on it. Like just that one-click button to get that environment that is guaranteed to work is, a very strong selling point. Let's finish.
If you want to contribute to DevPod, there's a button there as well. So definitely encouraging folks to do that.
Sweet. Let's finish with a couple of questions then, and then I'll let you go and enjoy the rest of your day. But you launched this a week ago. What has the response been like? Are people happy? You already mentioned someone maybe talked about Nix on Twitter. Just tell me about what you've seen from the people that have been reacting to the story.
Yeah, we've definitely seen a lot of, I think, positive responses. I think when I compare to the vCluster launch, I think vCluster, obviously being a much more narrow project with Kubernetes multi-tenancy, right? It took way long to get that kind of like, I guess, virality that DevPod already got within a couple of days. I mean, it's been like pretty much exactly 1 week at this point since launching it. And there's like over 800 GitHub stars. We were in GitHub trending. There were a couple of threads on Hacker News and on Reddit going on that were very, very vibrant. And I think the biggest thing for us was see that people already contribute to the project, right? There have been like quite a few pull requests, quite a bit of issues opened up. We fixed a lot of bugs. Apologies to all the Linux users who tried it initially, because apparently the desktop app just showed a white window when you open it up on Linux. I guess we could have tested that better, but we got that fixed in the first 2 days as well. So I think very, very exciting to see a lot of people just like get hands-on experience with it, because I think a lot of projects, people may find it interesting, they give it a GitHub star and they may not actually try it. But given that we've seen these error reports and feature requests, we know that people actually gave it a shot and found some bugs, or really liked the project and gave us that feedback. And ton of people joined on Slack as well. We have a Slack channel on slack.loft.sh, not just for DevPod, but for all of our projects.
Yep.
And there's some vibrant discussions on vCluster, but I didn't expect the DevPod Slack channel to have such a like a lot of discussions going on like 3 days in or so. That was kind of crazy to see.
Awesome. All right. Well, last question then is like, I know you're on the weekend and it's probably a difficult one, but what's next? What's on the roadmap for DevPod? What do you expect to be shipping feature-wise in the next 6 weeks, 6 months? Do you have an idea what the future holds?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I really want to prioritize pretty highly is these like making these provider options available on the workspace. Like you said earlier, hey, for this one I want a separate machine with more CPU, right? Right now you kind of have to always like modify the provider before you create a workspace. It's a little bit of like a the UX could be better on that end, and I think that's definitely a high priority among a whole bunch of other UX topics where just people told us like, oh, I got to click 5 times here and run this command to make this work. Couldn't this be easier? I think fleshing out these things will be a pretty high priority going forward, and then obviously adding more and more providers. I think we've had a lot of requests for like, hey, I want to make this work in Hetzner, etc. Right? So we're planning to have these sessions where we just interactively do that with the team, just like stream while we're coding it. Maybe ideally get someone from Hetzner on the team, or from Equinix on the team, or someone who wants to participate in that session, and then that will hopefully show more and more people how to create these providers themselves as well, and that'll be a lot of fun.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you again for joining me. DevPod looks like a really cool tool. I'm looking forward to trying it out. I'm definitely going to be working on the Equinix Metal provider so that I can test that out and kick the tires on it. But I'll just say thank you again. It's been fun. And hopefully I'll see you again soon.
Yeah, awesome. It was great being on your show again, David.
A pleasure's all mine. Thank you very much, Lucas. All right. See you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you for watching Warcode Live.